Finding a 5-star read is a very challenging thing, and I think that is one of the biggest struggles that we have as readers. So, on today's video, I'm going to be talking about every single book that I have rated 5 stars as of August 2024. Hello and welcome back. As I mentioned in the intro, we are going to tackle every book that I've read this year that I rated 5 stars, and I'm going to somewhat go in order in which I read them. So I have my Goodreads open on my computer, and I also have a list here. So I'm not going to talk too much. We're just gonna dive into it because I know that at least one of these books has to be your next 5-star read. At least I hope so. So let's get into it. The first book I rated 5 stars in 2024 was Cruel Boy by Clarissa Wilde, and this book I started reading in 2023, but it made its way into 2024 and I ended up finishing reading it in January. First book that I finished in the year. And this is your typical high school romance with a dark twist. The star quarterback, the normal girl, she knows a secret he doesn't want other people to know, so of course he's gonna make her life a living hell. Now, I'm not gonna give spoilers obviously on any of the books that I'm going to be talking about because I'm going to let you figure out why I rated these books 5 stars. So on to the next one. The next book I rated 5 stars in 2024 is A Diary of Blood. And this book is about Dracula's wife. We read it from her perspective and we figure out everything that is Dracula's love life, his character, how he is at home, and all of these weird, strange behaviors that he has. Now, Dracula in this book has multiple partners, not just his wife. And we see how these dynamics shift with the years, how these people are turned into vampires, and what ends up being the downfall of Dracula. So I'm not gonna say more. You should go check it out because I've seen this book a lot going around social media and there's a reason why. Next up is When Women Were Dragons, which is a fantasy historical fiction about women, or specifically mothers, in this town randomly turning into dragons and abandoning their homes. And we follow one of the characters whose mom ended up transforming into a dragon and leaving, and how she's trying to uncover the truth because the government doesn't want anyone to know about this whole situation. So there's a lot of hush hush, a lot of secrets. Scientists are trying to figure out what's happening, but they don't want the people to know what happened. So they're just saying that the women abandoned their houses, abandoned their homes, and only very few people understand what truly happened, why they transformed and turned into dragons, and why they won't come back. Next up is The E-Myth Revisited, and this was a book recommendation that I got from a video from another content creator who managed to basically use this book to create systems for his YouTube channel. So I've been in the process of figuring out how to make my life easier and how to stay consistent with my content creation, because ultimately this is something that I absolutely love to do. And so The E-Myth Revisited is a great book for people in business in general. It doesn't have to be a content creators, and the book actually doesn't focus on content creators at all. It's more of how do you make your business work by itself. And the author goes on talking about all the systems that need to be put in place. And by systems, I mean, what are the steps or the processes that are implemented so that no matter who is doing the job, they'll know how to do it. There's a formula behind the business. There's a way to do things that has been proven to be effective and efficient, and that can be taught to any person, no matter what their knowledge and experience is. So I highly recommend this book. Obviously, I rated it 5 stars, and I think it really shifted the way that I see, the way that I do content creation, but the way that I go about my career and even my life, honestly. So highly, highly recommend Demons Revisited. This one was a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I read Beyond the One, The Magic and Mayhem of Growing Up a Wizard. And if you know anything about the Harry Potter world, this is the story of Tom Felton, his memoir, I guess, and how he describes his entire experience being a child actor and how the experience was in the set of Harry Potter. Now, obviously, we know all the controversy that's going on with the Harry Potter world and the author and all the horrible things that she's been saying. But in this case, we're focusing more on the actor rather than the franchise. And so I wanted to give it a try because I know that the actors from this franchise don't align with the things that the author has been saying. So this book was incredible. I really liked how he approached the experience and how he talked about the entire process. So basically growing up being a child star and in this case a wizard, how he puts it in the title. Highly, highly recommend. You have probably noticed that in the beginning of the year I was a little bit in a non-fiction kick for a little while. So the next book I read was Grit, and this is about passion and perseverance. It's a self-helpy kind of sciencey book where the author is talking about people's grit, how it develops, and what it is that produces grit in people. Now, she is focusing on her research, so this is very much a data-driven book. It's a book where she basically talks about all her findings, and she also adds some stories here and there from her life and trying to figure out why it is that some people are successful and some people don't. And it's a really hard work, it's a really consistency. What is it that makes people be successful? After that, I went back to romance, I went back to fiction, and I read In the Weeds by B.K. Borison, who has slowly become one of my favorite authors. This book is the second book in the Love Light series. I had already read Love Light Farm, I think is the first one. I read it in 2023, and this one I read it in the beginning of 2024. What I love about this book is that if you read the first one, so this may be a spoiler, but if you read the first book, you know that the main character in the first book was participating in a social media contest. Well, this book follows the same story, but from the person that is hosting the contest. And we see how she didn't just go to Love Light Farm for the contest. She had other connections with the farm that she didn't actually know. So there's some romance, I would say a second chances romance going on, and it is very much a contemporary story. So it's so cute, it's such a cozy read, it's simple, easy to understand. It's also a quite short story. I think it has around 336 pages, so it's a really quick read. I absolutely loved it. Obviously, that's why the book is in this list, because it was fantastic. Something you're going to notice as I continue with this list is that the way that I've been reading series is all over the place. Mostly because I read most series through the library, so I have to wait for the holds to be available. So you're going to see that I have a book from a series here and a book from a series here and a book from a series here, and they're all just jumbled together, and there's series that I haven't finished yet. It's a whole thing. And I'm also a mood reader, so it also depends on that. So the next book is actually the first book in a different romance series, which is A Proposal They Can Refuse, and this is from the Vega Family Love Stories series. This is a Puerto Rican in Chicago story, if I'm not mistaken, and we have these two characters who basically hate each other. Their families are, I think, somehow connected, but her and the main character, so the two main characters, are very much two people that don't like each other. And so there are some restaurant war situation going on. There is some blackmailing happening. There's two grandpas that are the funniest thing in the world. I think the grandpas made the story, not gonna lie. So there's a lot of competition going on. Now, she is focusing on her family's restaurant. He is focusing on his grandpa distillery. And if I'm not mistaken, if I correctly remember, those two businesses are very close in their location, so they kind of have to see each other. So there's a lot of family dynamics that they are both dealing with, and then their rivalry. So enemies to lovers situation. We love a Puerto Rican story because honestly, as a Puerto Rican, I don't see this a lot. I don't know if it is that I don't know how to find the books, or that there's not enough people writing Puerto Rican stories. But either way, I absolutely love this story. And funny thing, the first time I tried to tackle this book, I actually DNF'd it. I don't know why. I think I wasn't in the right mood to read it, so I couldn't get through it. And then I said, okay, let me just give it another try. Let's see if this is truly a good story. And I'm so glad I went back and read it because I got obsessed. The second time around, I did actually understand the story and the characters and everything that was going on. So it just felt so nice to read. Such a cute story, and because it was Puerto Rican characters. With the next book, I went back to the science-based self-help books, and I read Feel Good Productivity, which is another book by a content creator. And this book was awesome because it focuses on how to find joy in everything that you do. And so that allows you to continue working on the things that you're working towards and the projects that you're engaging in and whatever your career is. So it's not so much about it being perfect and being always super successful, always super happy, because you're not gonna love every single thing that you do all the time. But there are ways for you to find joy in the things that you're doing and to identify what things actually bring you joy so that you can focus on those instead of tormenting yourself working on things that you don't actually feel a passion for. And so this book really allowed me to see how to approach my career and how to approach my content creation and how to not lose that spark as I continue working and facing challenges. The next two books are part of a very popular series. And the funny thing is that I'm going to be talking about books 2 and 3, but not book 1. And that is the Culpable series, which if you've been watching TV book adaptations, you know about Culpa Mia, which came out as a movie in Amazon Prime. Now, I rated Culpa Mia 4 stars after I watched the movie. I liked the story, but I didn't connect to it as much as I connected with the movie. And I think the movie might have influenced the fact that I didn't rate the book 5 stars. But regardless, I loved it. So obviously I had to read the rest of the series. So I read Culpa Tuya and Culpa Nuestra, which are books 2 and 3. And those I rated 5 stars. Now, do I necessarily like book Nick? Not entirely. But I liked it enough to be obsessed still with the story and to be so excited for the next movies to come out, which I'm really, really hoping that they all come out. As far as I know, I think Culpa Tuya is being recorded or it's about to be launched at some point soon-ish. So I'm really excited about it. But yeah, I adored books 2 and 3 more than books 1. So although I did read book 1 in 2024 as well, I rated 5 stars only books 2 and 3. After those, I read A Dish Better Served Hot, which is book 2 of the Vega family love stories. And that was the book that comes after A Proposal They Can't Refuse. So we have a very similar vibe going on in this book. We're just seeing the story, I believe, from the main characters from the first book, either the cousins or the siblings or something along those lines. And we still have the funny grandpas going on and their whole shenanigans. So we do still have food situations happening, but in this book we also get to see what happened to the first couple and how their love flourished and whatnot. So very cute stories, you know, your typical romance novel where you get to see the stories of different character pairs in each of the books. absolutely recommend. And like I said earlier, I love the fact that I get to read a Puerto Rican love story. I have to say, I did read a lot of romance. I think romance is my main genre right now. It used to be murder mysteries, but now romance is my top. It's been my top genre for the last, I would say, 1 or 2 years. Yeah, maybe like a year and a half. I've been really, really into romance. So after that, I dove into another popular series, which is Twisted Love. And of course, I gave it 5 stars, because how can you not to give 5 stars? That story is amazing. Right after I read Twisted Games, and again, 5 stars. It was like mind-blowing. Like, I am obsessed with that story, and I actually have not bought any physical copies of those books. So because I love them so much, I might actually end up buying a special edition if I find any at some point. But yeah, these books follow a group of friends, and each of the stories are based on each of the girls' love life. So I think at this point I have all the stories mixed up in my head, so I can't really tell you for sure what story is which, but I can definitely tell you that they are all really good stories, really romantic, and of course we have that spice moment going on if that's something that you're into. So definitely recommend it. The next couple books I read after Twisted Love and Twisted Games were so I'm not going to be talking about those obviously, but I ended up reading The Idea of You because, same as with Culpa Mia, I watched the movie and I absolutely loved it. So I had to read the book, and it was without a doubt a 5-star read. The romance, the age gap, the characters, the boy band, everything that happened in that story I loved. And honestly, I think I'm going to stick with the watching adaptations first, then reading the books, because I think that when I watch the adaptations after I've read the book, I start complaining about everything that they changed that didn't happen in the book. But when I read the book after, it feels more like I'm getting more about those characters. I get to see more about that world, and just, I guess it satiates that thirst for more of something that I watched and it's kind of over. So yeah, I'm probably going to stick with watching adaptations if they are available first, and then reading the books. The next book actually blew my mind because it is a popular, very popular author, and I hadn't been able to really connect with her stories until the book that I read before this one. And the book I'm talking about is Funny Story. Now, before that, I read Happy Place, and I had already read Beach Read and People We Meet on Vacation. And for some reason, Beach Read and People We Meet on Vacation, they just didn't live up to the hype that I was expecting, the way that I was expecting them to. But Happy Place was the book that I really said, okay, now I can say I'm an Emily Henry fan. And then I read Funny Story, and it just blew my mind. I think that those are my Emily Henry books. Those two books are amazing. They're funny, they're romantic. The way that the stories and the characters were developed, I absolutely loved more than in People We Meet on Vacation and Beach Read. The approach to those stories were just so much better. So I definitely recommend those. If you ask me, those are my favorite Emily Henry books. I then moved on to young adult, and I focused on a sapphic love story, which is actually a psychological thriller. There's a mystery, the main characters are artists, they are falling in love, there's a lot of people involved, and there's just really weird stuff happening. There's a stalker involved in the mix as well. It's a crazy story, but honestly super worth reading. I absolutely loved it. In June, I went back to the nonfiction, although I had read a couple other nonfictions, but just not 5-star reads. June came along, and one of my friends recommended I read Liliana's Invincible Summer, or El Invencible Verano de Liliana, which is a book in Spanish. It's a nonfiction, and it is reading from the sister's perspective. This is a book about a grieving sister. She's talking about her sister, how she was murdered. She got murdered by an ex that was abusive, and it takes you through this person's entire life. We get to meet Liliana. We get to see who she was. We get to see her life told from not only her sister's perspective, but family members, friends, people that went with her to college. The next book I read was Just for the Summer. And the funny thing about this is that this is the third book in the Part of Your World series. And I didn't know that. I read the entire book, and then I figured out that I had started the series in the most recent book, and that there were 2 other books that I was supposed to read. Now, this is not the first time I do that. I do this actually pretty often, that I start romance series in the middle or like towards the end, and then I have to go back and read the other books. So this is becoming my brand at this point. Now, in this book, the 2 main characters have a curse. They seem to be the person that other people date right before they find the love of their lives, but them too never find their person. And so they cross paths, I'm not gonna say how, and they decide that maybe if they date each other, they can cancel out the curse, and they can be each other's last person before they find the love of their life. But they were just supposed to date for the summer. So I'm gonna let you read the book and figure out if they stay together or not. It's a romance book, so you probably already know where this is going. But I loved it so much. It was such a cute and funny story. I loved it. Next up is another romance series, but this time I did start it correctly. I did start in book 1, and that is the Hot and Hammer series by Tessa Bailey, and the book is Fix Her Up. And basically we are following Georgie, who does not have a great love life, and who also is not someone who her family takes seriously, because she is not part of the family business. Basically, her family focuses on flipping houses, selling them or whatever, and she's more of an entertainer. She likes doing birthday parties, events, all these sort of things, and her family don't seem to understand that that is an actual business. And so throughout the story, we are looking at how she's trying to fix her love life and ends up falling for her brother's best friend, I believe. And also as she's trying to, I guess, improve her business and turn it into something more scalable, something bigger, so that her family can stop talking shit about her and saying that she's not actually doing anything serious with her life. They are trying to get her to be part of the family business, but she just doesn't want to do that. And so there's a lot of growth that happens, a lot of having to follow your dreams and having to follow whatever it is that you know is the path that is right for you, while also, of course, having that element of romance. I immediately read book 2 of the Hot and Hammer series, and this one is Love Her or Lose Her, which is following another one of the girls, because this series follows a bunch of friends. They're all female, and they have their really cute club, and they support each other, and it's a very girls type of situation. So we have Rosie, whose marriage is about to collapse, and her husband is more focused on providing rather than actually having a relationship. And so they are struggling. There's a lot of stuff happening, and she feels like her dreams are not important. She's always wanted to open a restaurant, and she's never had the guts to do it. And partially it's because of how the dynamic at home is. And so she's working towards saving her marriage, but also working towards opening her restaurant. Now, she has a lot of support from her friends and family, and it's just a very nice family story about sticking together and pushing through the things that happen. Now, The next book was a super random find, but I'm so glad I read it. It's called Confessions of an Alleged Good Girl. And this is a pastor's daughter who is struggling with her relationship with her parents and also with this boy at church. Now, this boy is supposed to be the love of her life. Her parents approve of him. He goes to the same church. He's a very good guy. And there's all these expectations put in the two of them. They're basically the it couple at church. And what people don't know is that that whole dynamic that they think those two have is not actually that reality. He is pressuring her into doing things that they shouldn't be doing because these are teenagers. And she starts developing some health issues because of that. And so not only is she struggling with trying to maintain that relationship that she thought that was the right thing for her, but basically the situations that happened put everything in her life into perspective. There's situations with her older sister that no longer lives at home. There's situations with their parents, which honestly are very over controlling and overbearing. And then her perspective and her perception of herself, her own personal value, and the decisions that she makes as she starts finding who she is authentically and doing the things that feel right for her. And so it's a very beautiful story. I think this is a great story for teenagers, especially because I feel like there's a lot of peer pressure and a lot of expectations and a lot of miscommunication with adults that can be fixed. Things that you don't necessarily have to go with the crowd and do the things that other people think you should be doing. And so I highly, highly, highly recommend this book because I felt like even as an adult, thinking back at my younger self, a book like this would have definitely been an eye-opener for a lot of stuff, and I would have learned a lot of lessons from it, even though I did get the chance to learn lessons, obviously, in other forms. But I think this would have been an amazing book for me to read when I was a teenager, so I highly, highly, highly recommend it. The next book, we are diving into fantasy, and is These Twisted Bonds, which is the second book in the These Hollow Vows series, which I actually think is a duology. I don't think any other book is gonna come out for this or has come out for this. So this was a rocky series for me. Book one I struggled with a lot, but book two, things got better in book two. Did things happen the way that I expected them to? No. But I am definitely satisfied with the way that they did happen. I think at this point, and I don't want to say a lot because the things that happen in this book obviously depend on the things that happen in book one, but let's just say that the main character's purpose was achieved and she found more than she expected. She not only was able to rescue the person that she was trying to rescue, but she also managed to rescue herself and find who she truly was. There were a lot of questions that were not answered in book one because of, the story and the cliffhanger that things ended. And I think this book did a good job at tying all those things together. So although book one didn't really sit with me as well as I expected, and I mean it in the sense that it wasn't really a vibe that I enjoyed that much, but book two, that is definitely where the story hit. So it's a 50-50 thing for me, but I did rate book two 5 stars because it was definitely a really good story. The next book is also part of the Hot and Hammered series. It is Tools of Engagement, and it is following another one of the sisters. And in this case, we have Bethany, who is actually part of the family that has the house flipping business. And she used to work with them. But what happens? She got tired of only being seen as the person that does the staging and nothing else. She had no other responsibilities, and she wanted to prove that she can actually handle a flip. And so she decided to leave the family business and start her own family, buy a property, and flip it herself. And her love interest, obviously, there he goes to help her. So he also abandons her brother's business because, the business had already been passed down to their generation. And he goes on and helps her because he knows that she's gonna need it. So they have an enemies to lovers situation happening there. And ultimately, she ends up in a television show, a reality TV show, competing against her brother to see which of the flips it ends up being better. The next book on my list was one of my most anticipated releases for 2024, and that is The Grandest Game. This is part of the Inheritance Games world, but it is a separate series. Now, originally, it was going to be the Inheritance Game trilogy, and then Grandest Game was going to be part of the Brothers Hawthorne. Now, after reading this book, and I think I did post a vlog about this, so you might have been able to see what ended up happening there, but basically, Grandest Game ended up being the one that starts a separate series, and there's an additional book coming that will be the continuation of this story. And so whatever it was that we saw in Brothers Hawthorne does continue here, but it kind of restarts. I guess it starts another sequence for the series. This book is the actual games play by play. In Brothers Hawthorne, this is a spoiler, but in Brothers Hawthorne, we have Avery deciding to create a game where people can participate and win part of the money that she had inherited. And Grandest Game is actually the second year that they do the games. And it follows a whole separate set of characters. Some of them we know from previous books, specifically from Brothers Hawthorne. And other characters are introduced in this series, but the cliffhanger that this book left me in is ridiculous. I'm not going to say anything else because I don't want to spoil it. What I do have to say is that Jennifer Lynn Barnes does not miss. I love the Inheritance Game series, and this book just continued adding to my love for that series. The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik. This is, I believe, the last book in the Skullman series. And this is where we see what the heck happened after basically their class graduated in The Last Graduate. So the previous book. The book did start a little bit draggy. I felt lost a lot of the times. What saved this book to become a 5-star for me was the ending. Everything in the end obviously tied together and made sense, but there were things that I really would have wished they were handled in a different way, and there were certain tropes or certain subplots that really I felt like the book could have done without. What ended up happening in the book definitely hit the spot. I think that the book definitely fixed how I was feeling about it towards the end. And so I had to rate it 5 stars because it ended up being amazing. Now, like I said, the beginning, first half of the book was so-so for me. There was a lot of, not enough action, too much suffering, I would say. And there were other situations happening that I didn't really care about much, because what I truly cared about was what had happened in the previous book, and I wanted this book to focus on that. So I feel like that had to do with how I felt in the beginning. But regardless, Naomi Novik, the Skullman series, hitting, okay? It's a fantastic series, and putting aside all of that dragging that the book did in the beginning, I definitely think that ultimately it was a really good book. We are down to our last 3 books, so we are almost there. The next book that I read, I did again. The whole thing about starting series in the middle, I did it again. I read the rule book which is the second book in the cheat sheet series. And the first book is the cheat sheet, and I haven't read it yet. At this point that I'm recording this video, I haven't read that book yet. But eventually I'll get to it. Now, on this book, we have Nora. I believe she's like a sports manager or something like that. Athlete manager. And she ends up becoming the new manager for a big NFL player who just happens to be her college ex-boyfriend who hates her. There's a lot going on there. I'm not gonna say a lot about what happened because anything can be a spoiler. I'm just going to say that things get interesting and there's a lot of public situations happening, and they accidentally make a decision while drunk that then they have to figure out if they actually want to keep it that way. So there's scandals, there's a lot of things going public, and there's a lot of situations happening that are putting on the line mostly her career, but his a little bit. So it was a very dramatic book, but in a really good way. You know, it was like a very gossipy type of romance. I really enjoyed all the shenanigans that was happening. And also I really liked the way that they dealt with the situations that had happened in the past and how they were able to move past the bad stuff and basically fix the miscommunication and fix the misunderstandings that had happened. Second to last book, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which took me a while to read. If you've seen my other videos, you know that I started reading this book from the library in Spanish and I couldn't get through it, so I ended up listening to the audiobook and I managed to get through it. And honestly, this book was just a beautiful book. This book, more than being for entertainment, I think it scratched an itch in my brain for something, I would say, a piece of art in literary form. You know, it's a very lyrical, very poetic book. There's a lot to think about, there's a lot to analyze, there's a lot to make you question situations in your life and decisions in life, and it just gives a whole different perspective. I feel like even though it's a fiction book, it's definitely the type of book that will make you evaluate your life. It's a book that triggers introspection. I think that was the thing that I loved about it the most, because I have to admit I was bored in certain parts of the book, but I think the fact that the book has so much important information and such beautiful quotes and just lessons, that there were parts that even though I didn't really click with them that much, overall they made the book whole. Everything that was in the book had to be there, you know. And to be fair, the parts that I kind of felt disconnected from were the parts that were not focused solely on Addie. There was a section in the book that switches points of view and it focuses on her love interest. And I guess for a second there, I was like, I don't care about this guy. I don't care about his life. I know he's kind of in the same boat as her, but I don't really care about him. I want to know about her. I want to know what happened to her. I want to know what's going to happen to her. And yes, I want to know what's going to happen with him, but in terms of her, not him by himself. And so I guess that kind of threw me off a little bit. But honestly, I think that we did need the backstory and we did need to get to know him in order for things to make sense. And so ultimately, I feel like the sacrifices that were made and just the way that things played out was so beautiful. And yes, of course, I gave it a 5 stars. I had to. The way that this book was written was truly a piece of art. Last but definitely not least, Carrie Soto is back. This book had been on my TBR since it came out. I pre-ordered this book and I had not read it. I was going to read it as physical book, and I do have it obviously, but I ended up listening to the book instead, and I'm actually glad I did. It ended up being a 5-star, similar to the case with a few of the other books, that the ending was what saved them. Now, what ended up happening with this book was that I was expecting a more romance heavy book like other Taylor Jenkins Reid books. So I guess I was comparing Carrie Soto is Back a lot to Daisy Jones and the Six and to Malibu Rising, and of course Evelyn Hugo. I do feel like out of the 4 books, Carrie Soto is Back resembles Evelyn Hugo the most, but I think Evelyn Hugo had a lot more passion and drama in it versus Carrie Soto being more about her career in the sense of her almost being a robot, which makes sense. I feel like Carrie Soto is the workaholic version of an athlete, and the book very much focuses on the tennis aspect, on her career, on what she's trying to achieve and how she's trying to be the best. And so because it wasn't so romance heavy, at first I was a little bit like, okay, this is not meeting my expectations. Is this going to end up being a book that I'm going to DNF? But once I hit the point in the book that I truly connected with her and I truly understood where she was coming from and I got some emotion out of her, that's when I stopped caring so much about the romance aspect, because I don't just read romance, obviously, but I guess the perception that I had of this book, and based on the other books that I've read by Taylor Jenkins Reid, I assumed that the romance was going to be a big aspect of it, and I thought that the romance was going to play an important part in her development, which it didn't. And honestly, it's kind of refreshing because it can't all be about men or a significant other. There are certain things that need to be just about the person, and I think in Carrie Soto, we get to see how romance ends up being something that's completely out of her mind, or almost completely out of her mind, because she's so centered, so focused on her career. And yes, there are certain behaviors that Carrie has that honestly, girl, don't. But the reality is that I feel like those behaviors were important to the story because that's where we see the character development happen. That's where we see her growth. That's where we see her learning. And that's where we see that shift in her mindset, where she eventually is able to see what things actually matter and what things don't. And I think that is the biggest, most important lesson that this book brings. It focuses so much on always chasing the next thing and never being satisfied with what we have. So learning to find that satisfaction and learning to accept when it's enough and it's time to move on and do something else. So if my calculations are correct, that puts us at 30 5-star reads out of 48 books that I've read so far as of September 3rd, which is when I'm recording this video. This is probably the year that I've had the best reading experience, I would say. I feel like my reading has been slower than other years, so I haven't been reading as much, but I've been reading better books. I have DNF'd a lot of books. I don't even remember which ones, but I have DNF'd a lot of books, and I think that is the reason why I've been able to find so many good reads, because I am not putting myself through books that I don't actually enjoy. And so yeah, I've read less books than what I probably read last year or the year before, but I think that I've read better books that are more attuned with me and my mood, and books that I've been enjoying more. So that is all I have for the books that I've read in 2024 so far. I am definitely going to do a follow-up video later in the year so that we can talk about the rest of the 5-star reads that I had this year. Now, I know this is a very odd time in the year to do this, because typically people do this video in June, but I felt like it was a good thing to talk about, you know, kind of off-season type of thing to talk about. And so yeah, 30 books, 35 star reads out of 48. Honestly, to me, that is insane. And so let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know if there's any that kind of give similar vibes, and if you've loved them, drop the titles on the comment sections. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.